It was a routine traffic stop, or so the officers thought. A black man behind the wheel of a sleek, unassuming car drew their attention. Without hesitation, they pulled him over, their tone sharp and assumptions clear. What started as a simple stop spiraled quickly into a humiliating display of authority. The man, calm but visibly annoyed, complied with every request, his silence masking a story far deeper than they could imagine. The officers grew bolder, their condescension making it clear they believed him to be just another easy target. What they didn't know, however, was that this wasn't an ordinary man. Behind his composed demeanor was someone far more powerful, someone they worked for. As tension built and the officers continued their behavior, a revelation loomed that would flip the situation upside down. Just who was this man, and how would the truth come to light? Stay tuned. The man sat quietly in his car, watching the officers with a steady gaze. Despite their stern faces and dismissive remarks, he chose not to argue, even as their questions turned from routine to invasive. His calmness wasn't what they expected. It only seemed to irritate them more. One officer smirked, leaning closer to ask, "You think you're some kind of big shot?" The man didn't answer, only handing over his ID with an unwavering hand. What was on that ID? The officers barely glanced at it, brushing it aside as they doubled down on their tone. The man's silence wasn't from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of the situation. How quickly things could change. His mind flashed to the hours he'd spent reviewing state protocols, championing fairness within the force. Yet here he was, facing the very system he worked to fix. The officers had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. As the officers continued their heavy-handed approach, their words grew sharper, and their actions hinted at more than just a simple misunderstanding. Onlookers slowed down to watch the scene unfold, their murmurs filling the air as one officer raised his voice, demanding answers to questions already provided. The man's patience was wearing thin, but his years of leadership had taught him how to remain calm under pressure. Still, it was hard not to feel the sting of what was happening, a stark reminder of why so many were fighting for change in the first place. From the other side of the road, a young woman began recording the scene with her phone. She'd recognized the man instantly, though the officers still had no clue. She whispered to a friend beside her, "They don't know who he is, do they?" Inside the car, the man glanced at the growing crowd. The tension was palpable, yet he remained quiet, waiting for the moment to reveal the truth, not just for himself, but for something bigger than this single incident. The situation was spiraling, and the officers, still oblivious to the gravity of their mistake, continued to assert their authority. "Step out of the car," one barked, his tone leaving no room for debate. The man sighed, his patience tested to its limit. Slowly, he opened the door and stood, towering over the officers, yet maintaining his composed demeanor. The murmurs from the bystanders grew louder as the woman with the phone nudged her friend, whispering, "This is about to get serious." One officer noticed the crowd and muttered something under his breath, his frustration turning to unease. Still, he pressed on. "What are you doing here? Do you even belong in this area?" The man's jaw clenched at the blatant insinuation, but he kept his voice steady as he finally responded. "I have every right to be here, more than you realize." The officers exchanged glances, a flicker of doubt finally crossing their faces. The man reached for something inside his coat, his deliberate motion causing a ripple of tension in the air. But it wasn't what they feared. It was his badge, unmistakable and official, gleaming in the sunlight. The realization hit the crowd instantly, though the officers had yet to process the truth. Everything was about to unravel. For a moment, there was stunned silence. The gleaming badge in his hand seemed to catch the sunlight at just the right angle, making it impossible to ignore. The lead officer squinted, leaning in to get a closer look, his confidence faltering. "Chief," he mumbled under his breath, the words barely audible. The man remained silent, watching as the weight of the situation started to dawn on them. But before the officers could fully process their mistake, a black SUV pulled up nearby, its government plates confirming this wasn't an ordinary onlooker arriving. The door opened, and out stepped a sharply dressed aide, phone in hand. Her urgency was palpable as she walked toward them, glancing at the chief and then addressing the officers directly. "What exactly is going on here?" she demanded, but their superior, her superior, wasn't finished yet. The chief calmly stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "I've let this go on long enough," he said, his tone dripping with authority. But just as he prepared to deliver the revelation that would end their charade, the radio on one officer crackled with a call. The dispatcher's frantic voice warned of an unfolding emergency nearby, demanding all units to respond immediately. The officers hesitated, caught between their blunder and their duty. The tension in the air was unbearable. The officers froze, torn between the dispatcher's urgent call and the realization they'd made a monumental mistake. The chief didn't flinch. He held up a hand, signaling them to stay where they were. "Answer it," he said calmly. "Your priorities shouldn't waver, even in a situation like this." His words carried a weight the officers couldn't ignore. One of them stammered into the radio, confirming they would respond soon, but the chief wasn't done yet. Turning to the bystanders, he scanned their faces, lingering on the woman still recording. "Keep that footage," he said firmly. "This isn't just a lesson for them. It's proof of why things must change." His tone was measured, not angry, yet it echoed with conviction. The crowd murmured in approval, and the officers shifted uncomfortably under the weight of their humiliation. But then came the twist. As the chief handed the badge back to the aide, she leaned in, her voice low. "Sir, that emergency. It's directly tied to what just happened here." The chief's eyes narrowed as she shared more details quietly. Suddenly, the pieces fit. A systemic flaw bigger than this moment had emerged, and the officer's mistake was just the tip of the iceberg. Without another word, the chief stepped into the SUV, signaling the officers to follow in their squad car. They had just gotten an unwelcome new assignment, fixing the very mess they had unknowingly exposed. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. As the convoy of vehicles disappeared down the road, the bystanders were left buzzing about what had just unfolded. The woman with the phone turned off her recording, knowing she had captured more than just an interaction. She had witnessed a moment that could spark change. In the SUV, the chief stared out of the window, his mind already racing. He knew that addressing this would require more than an apology or reprimands. It was a chance to shine a light on the deeper flaws within the system he now led.